"The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good. Let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it."
Well, welcome to St. Andrews, whether you're joining us online or in person. My name's Jason, and if I haven't met you yet, I'm one of the pastors here, and I'm so glad that you are with us today. We're in the middle of a series on the book of Ruth as we go through Lent. And for those of you who are new, because I see a lot of new faces, I want to catch you up real quick in just a moment, because the rest of us, we've been together talking about this a little. I want to make sure you're right here with us as we get started. The book of Ruth is a story about a woman named Naomi and her daughter-in-law Ruth. They have left a foreign land and come back to the land of Israel, to a place called Bethlehem, because all of the husbands died, the sons died, they're in the middle of a famine, and they are struggling, just hoping to survive for one more day. They make it back home, and then everything from there starts to fall into place, almost as if God is working out things behind the scenes in their life, just like he is in yours. And so this week, as we begin chapter 3 of this 4-chapter book, what we find is that Ruth's future, her very survival, is hanging in the balance. And everything that's going to happen next will determine whether or not she lives another day, and we're talking about her all these thousands of years later. But really, her life is completely out of her control. And I was thinking this week about how often that is true for us. Control is such an illusion, isn't it? We desperately want to have it. We desperately think we can create it. And yet, truthfully, it is just a vapor. I got so reminded by this in the last couple of days, because this is the most wonderful time of the year in March Madness and the NCAA tournament. And I, like many of you, according to ESPN, 25 million or so, filled out a bracket, and I had so much hope. Now, I played college basketball, so I should be pretty good at picking this stuff. But I filled out my bracket like many of you did, and by Thursday night, I realized how little control I had over anything. Because you can't control 18 and 19 and 21-year-old kids. You can't make them make shots that are layups. You cannot keep them from turning the ball over and causing my team to lose and be out. By Friday night, there were 0 perfect brackets left. Everybody's confused. And now we just get to sit back and see what happens, right? No control whatsoever. In fact, here is an actual sample of what my bracket looks like right now. So, nothing that I can hold on to. The same is true in our lives. All we can do is go with what happens and learn to live in light of it. And from here, our story shows Ruth's choice to do exactly that. Last week, we left with this verse. Ruth and Naomi, the Moabite, and her mother-in-law got back to Bethlehem, and she finds a friend, a guy, to go and glean in his field. She's picking up leftover grain, just hoping to make it. And it said this, after she went home that night, she told Naomi, she said, "I found a guy that I got stuff from, and his name is Boaz." And this is what we left you with. "So the Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He's not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." And she said, "That man is our close relative. He's one of our guardian redeemers." We'll talk about what that means here in just a second. So the end of the harvest is coming. That was the close of that chapter. Ruth had found a place, and she spends the next couple of months going every day to Boaz's field, being protected by him and getting enough grain for them to just make it through, to survive. Her and her mother-in-law. It's an empty house. They have empty stomachs. Naomi has had an empty life to this point. In fact, she's so bitter because of the things that were taken away from her, her husband, her children, her future, that she tells the people in Bethlehem, "Just call me bitter, because God has been difficult with me." Well, a couple of months go by and they've survived, and Naomi, the mother-in-law, goes into control mode. She decides she's going to figure out how to fix this thing. If she is a good Jewish mother-in-law, and if any of you had a Jewish mother-in-law or are a Jewish mother-in-law, what I'm about to say will make total sense to you. Because there's one right here. She decides she's going to fix this issue. She's like, Ruth, girl, we got to get you married. I can't have you hanging around the house like this. I can't take care of you anymore. So you're going to have to find a good man. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to put on your best clothes. It's in the Bible. You read it for yourself. She says, put on your best clothes. Take a shower, girl. You look awful. And put some perfume on. Get yourself smelling and looking real good. And then you go to that guy, Boaz. And one night, after he's worked hard and he's feeling good about what's happened, after he has a nice big steak with a crust on the outside, medium rare on the middle, a big cab with legs that would just, when he is in a good mood, Ruth, when he is in high spirits, then I want you to crawl up at his feet and ask him to redeem you. Well, Ruth does exactly what Naomi asks, because that's what we do, right? When mother-in-law says do something, that's what you do. Guys, shake your heads, yes. When your mother-in-law says do it, you do it. So she shows up, looking and smelling good. She sits at Boaz's feet, and he falls asleep, and then he kind of gets startled, and he wakes up and he says, who are you? And she says in the dark, I'm your servant Ruth. And it says this in Ruth chapter 3, verses 9 and following. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you're a guardian redeemer of our family. That's like, it would be a symbol, kind of like put a ring on it. This is a symbol of engagement. Take care of me, cover me. In fact, Boaz had prayed that exact same thing last chapter. Do you remember? May God spread his wings over and cover you. And Boaz says, the Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You haven't run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people in my town, they know that you're a woman of noble character. This is a good deal for Boaz. He's getting a good woman, plus she smells good. Did I mention that? Although it's true that I'm a guardian redeemer of our family, there actually is another more closely related than I. So stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I'll do it. This is God's word. Thanks be to God. To understand what's happening here, I just want to teach you a little bit of history. We're going to talk some language, some history, some understanding, and then I'm going to apply this with you. And at the end of our time together, every single one of us has a response to make. Over the next 75 minutes or however long it takes to preach, I'm just kidding. Over the next few minutes, you're going to be thinking about what's your response to this message. But here's what we're all focused on, this idea of a guardian redeemer. In Hebrew, the word for that is goel, G-O-E-L, goel. Can you say it? Goel. Goel is a redeemer, and what a goel would have is a close male relative in a family that carried some responsibility. It was a privilege, but it was also a heavy burden and responsibility. I want to tell you what those responsibilities were. There were at least 5 things that a goel would do, but their main idea, the main purpose was to secure the people of that family, the inheritance, the land, the money of that family, and its future. They were to make sure that no family ever lost their place in the society or lost their name and identity. The legacy would continue. So it's a really important job, whether they wanted it or not. The goel would have these things. First, they were what is known as the guardian redeemer. And that would mean this: they could buy someone out of slavery. If one of their family members or relatives found themselves enslaved or in indentured servitude to someone else, and this would usually happen if you had a calamity in your life, maybe it was some kind of issue with your health or with your crops, or you made a dumb business decision and you ended up owing money to someone, they could actually place you into their slavery. But the goel could go and buy you out. And that was their job, to protect you. In fact, in Leviticus 25, it says this is built into God's law, which is why I want to show you this. Because he cares about us making sure that we're taking care of each other, that our families continue. It says they retain the right of redemption after they've sold themselves. And one of their relatives may redeem them. An uncle or a cousin or any blood relative in their clan can be their guardian redeemer. So if you get in trouble, he's going to come get you. Secondly, and this is a fun one for middle schoolers in the room, they were an avenger of blood. And what this would mean is that if somebody in your family was murdered, premeditated killing, you were the person to carry out the execution of the murderer. That was your job. You were to go and bring justice, to avenge what was wrong. And then the third thing that they were supposed to do would be able to retrieve the land, to buy back any land that got lost. Because God didn't just care about your physical, yourself, he cared about your property and the family's legacy as well. And so in Leviticus 25:25, it says, if one of the Israelites becomes poor and they got to sell off stuff, you can go get the land back. And here's what's really interesting about this. Just hang with me for one more minute. If they found themselves unable to buy back this land that they had lost, it was rightfully their families, but they had lost it, then at what's called the time of Jubilee, they could go and all the land would be returned. Did you know that God built into his very system and in his law a way to make sure there was not cyclical, chronic poverty? Even if you and your brother-in-law got together and you started a business, you did all of it wrong, you made all the mistakes, and it gets taken and everything is taken from you, you are destitute. At most, it would last one generation. Because the year of Jubilee was every 50 years, and then all the land that had changed hands would be returned to its original and rightful owner. God wanted to continue to carry on what he had given to his people. And the job of the Goel was to go get it. Finally, two last things, they would also carry on the family name. And this is going to get really weird for you in a second with your 21st century years. This is called levirate marriage. And what would happen is if your brother died without an heir, which Ruth's husband had died, then you were to marry your sister-in-law and impregnate her so that the name of your brother could carry on. Some of you are thinking about your sister-in-law right now, or your brother-in-law, and you're saying, I am so glad that this is not what we do anymore. Although last night there was a lady in the service that told me that in her family, just 2 generations ago, there was a levirate marriage. I thought that was really interesting. But that would be the last thing, to continue the family name. Do you see the point of the Goel is to basically, as a representative of the whole family, to make sure they are safe, secure, and that they have a future. But finally, to do that, they would have to give up their own right to the inheritance. Because you see how this would work. If you and your brother, mom and dad, had a bunch of an estate and he died, you would get it all, right? You'd be the last rightful owner. But if you chose to help create a nephew or niece or somebody else, now you had to split what could have been yours. And this is going to be really important next week when we finish up this story. So that's a Goel. That's what it would mean for them to redeem. That's what the Redeemer did. And as a result, that family, the person would be restored, their name would live on, and their future and fortune would be what they were supposed to be. See, we think of redeem, and I think of coupons, right? We think maybe of like, I got them back, like a little bit of retributive justice. Somebody spoke badly about me and slandered me, but my reputation, it came out that that wasn't true. I got redemption. That's kind of as far as we think. But redemption in the biblical record and the way God thinks about it is so much bigger. Redemption, in fact, James K. Smith says it like this: redemption is the restoration of our very humanity. It's to take what it means to be human that's been lost and to restore it. Any of you ever remember reading, I think it's Thomas Hobbes, the philosopher, that talked about, he was speaking about humans on their own without government, that life is basically solitary, poor, brutish, nasty, and short. That's on our own, that's where we end up. And that's true of life, apart from a redemption. So we're all trying to figure out how to redeem ourselves, how to be restored to what we believe we know we really should be. But here's the question: do you know really what God intended when he intended you? Can I tell you what he meant when he met you? What he means for humanity? It's this: humanity is supposed to begin from a place of being loved, accepted, affirmed, and approved simply because you exist. Apart from anything else you've done, just the fact that God thought you were a good idea means that you start from there. And then you take that and you're to image him, to reflect God in everything that you do. And he gives you power and the ability to then go, and his intention was for us to live like him with other people, to be generous and to serve and to forgive quickly if somebody makes a mistake, and to offer up ourselves in the service of others for the flourishing of others. That's what you were meant for. And then as you did that, he gave us gifts and skills, talents and ability. And he said, I want you to be like me. I want you to be a co-creator with me. This is why you have the desire, and I have the desire to make things, to build companies or businesses where people come and experience the goodness of the culture that you've created, or the product that you've made that serves people. We were intended to make gorgeous buildings through architecture that would cause people to think about how amazing God is and to live lives of fullness. Like, that's our intention, to teach great lesson plans and clean floors and do it all with this sense of joy and purpose. And then we were supposed to do that in the context of communities, relationships, and people that don't walk out on you, don't turn their back, things that don't get broken. And ultimately to do all of those things, finding that kind of joy and approval and freedom forever. That's God's intention for humanity. How we doing? How many of you this week went to work and thought, I have never flourished more. There is no frustration. My best me is being given to the world, and they love what I'm bringing. No, anybody? No one? Yeah, that's what God meant. But instead, our lives are solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And then they're over. And so we got to do something. So we're all trying to restore that humanity through some way. And the problem is we end up doing it in a lot of the wrong ways. It's the difference to me in like what it means to be a slave versus what it meant to be a redeemed child. A slave, if you think about this, if you're a slave, your only identity comes from who owns you, and your only worth comes from how much you produce, right? And when you stop producing, when you're not able to do whatever it is that they're asking you to do, you're discarded. Your worth is over. But what God intended was for us to live the life that I just described. God, in fact, gave you and me life once. And then the fall happened. The fall is the way that we understand the world. Like, sin came in and it messed up everything. It made us do stupid things. It made us do disobedient and rebellious things. It caused the world around us to not cooperate, and sickness and blah, 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 all this stuff. And God said, I gave you life once and I want to give you life again. There's a really cool story that I think illustrates this that some of you know, and it's about how God gives us life the second time. Around the turn of the century in 1900s in England, there was a big party in this large estate one night. Great party. You and I would have wanted to be there. It had the best food and music, and it was raucous and loud and dancing, and all the right people were there. And in the middle of that party, someone heard a shriek because one of the children had fallen into the pool and was drowning. All of a sudden, the gardener jumps in and he grabs and rescues the kid out of the pool. He saves him. And the parents come and they look at the gardener and they're just like, we'll do anything. How can we ever repay you? What do you want? And the gardener just says, I would love it if you would just pay for my kid to go to college. I have a son. I'd love for him to be able to get an education. And so they commit to doing that. Well, time goes by, and the little boy that fell in the pool, some of you know where this is going, his name, you might have heard of him, his name was Winston Churchill. And he was rescued out of the pool by this gardener's son. By the gardener, and his son, whose name was Alexander Fleming, he grew up after going to college at Churchill's parents' cost, and he developed penicillin as the ability to fight infection. So, Winston Churchill is now the Prime Minister of England, and stuff's going crazy in the world, and he gets sick. And he's got a bacterial infection, and somebody brings him penicillin. And he's told, who is it that created this? And he said, Sir Alexander Fleming, who looked a little bit different by that point. And he said he realized that now he had been saved twice by the same person. That rarely would that happen in our lives. What an incredible thing. Who knows what God is doing in your and my life? But his rescue and redemption was because he wanted life for him again. This is what God wants for you and me as well. Because everyone's trying to find it. Most of us are trying to create it, to manufacture what it means to be human, what it means to be us. And there's only two ways to get it. You either create it or you receive it. When we find Ruth in this place, her very future, her identity is going to be based on whether she can choose to receive it. She can't control anything. All she can do is humbly, in humility and in complete vulnerability, go to Boaz and say, will you do this for me? And here's what you need to know of this story. Like you and I, no matter what you look like or when you had to shave last, we're Ruth. We look at Boaz and he's amazing. He's a great character. It's good to be like him. But actually in this story, Boaz is Jesus. He's the Redeemer, the Goel, the one who's going to make everything right to restore the humanity. Ruth is you and me. And all we can do is simply go to him in humility, vulnerability, and say, will you redeem me? Will you take me back? But we don't so often. We try to do it on our own, and it enslaves us. So what are we enslaved to? We're enslaved to sin first, like its power and the stuff that it does to us and the penalty of it. We're told the wages, the earnings of sin is death. We're enslaved to that. We can't get away from it. And so the first thing that our Goel Jesus does is break that. He kills sin. That's what we just sang. He killed the grave. He absolutely, and this is why Easter is so amazing, he absolutely goes in and he is the avenger of blood for that which would take us out. And he says, no more. But then he goes further than that. He says, now I want to buy you back from that slavery. And some of the things that we get enslaved to that I just see and I actually experience myself are things like power and career and image and family and children. Let me just give you an example because I know you don't really believe me right now that you're enslaved to it. But let me see if this works. We live in a culture, right, that super prizes image, like how we look. And then where we live in particular, it's really on steroids, right? We got to look right. I mean, that is important. And it starts to mess with us. We start to believe that our worth comes from how well we look. Now, some of you look great, and I'm so glad. And we should. We should try to use, God gave us this body. You should use it, make it healthy, and do your best with it. But have you noticed that no matter how hard you try and what you add and bring, like, we're losing? Your bracket in the looks department is busted. It's got more red X's than mine. Right? We're done. And even if you get outside help and do, like, over time, every year, do you like me? I look in the mirror, I'm just like, seriously? Dadgummit, how did that happen? That's what I told the first service. That's the second time now I've used dadgummit in a sermon at St. Andrews. My Southern is showing. But we feel that. And even if you could do it great for 100 years, by the time you breathe your last, you're not looking great. But how many of us base our worth on that? How we look. It becomes a slave master. We become a slave to it. Same thing is true with our kids. Another example. Some of us, we have this idea that our identity, our worth, is from how well we do as a parent. And you know what that does? That makes us look at those kids and they got to behave really well all the time because we don't want other people to think badly about how they behave. And then they got to get the right grades and go to the right school and get the right job and marry the right person who's got the right name. And all of that matters. It reflects on us. And do you know what happens when we put that pressure on a child? First, you know what the child does? They go marry Johnny and elope before they go to college. And they become a artist or something. I love you. They don't do our plans. You can't control that. And yet you want to base your value on that? Now you're laughing, but some of you are looking, I'll do that. And go down the line. Your marriage, how much pressure is on your spouse to complete you and to make you happy and to be all that. We can't. And we just crush one thing after. And these are all good things. Right? That's the difference. These are all things, your health and your looks and your career and your money and your kids and your spouse, all that's good. But what happens is we make it ultimate. That's what C.S. Lewis talks about. Jessica and her life group, they're studying something, and she was telling me this quote the other day from Lewis where he talks about every disordered love that we make ultimate then becomes a demon. It actually becomes like a master so cruel. And the way that you know what it is that you have as a master that you're worshiping is like, Tim Keller says, it's everything that whenever you're thinking about it late at night, you can't stop thinking about it. That it makes you believe if you lost it, you'd have nothing. That if it went away, you wouldn't be worth anything, or your identity would completely gone. Whatever that is, that's your master. That's what you need redemption from. And so our Goel says, I'll set you free from all of it. If this hadn't happened, spoiler alert, next week she's going to get redeemed. You'll have to come back and see how it works out because there's some moments of intrigue. But if it hadn't happened, Ruth probably ends up poor, sick, likely a prostitute because that'd be the only way to feed herself. Her family wiped out, no more names. She stays an outsider because she always was. She doesn't get brought in here. And after a long, let's say super long life, if she made it to 80, she would die and no one would remember her name whatsoever. Nasty, solitary, poor, brutish, and short. But there was a Redeemer that said, you are mine. And he says the same about you. And I want to restore you to the humanity that's full of glory. Irenaeus said that the glory of God is a human fully alive. That the beauty of God is when we see someone living like I described a few minutes ago. That's what you're intended for. And that's what's on offer today by this Redeemer. So I said to you before, there are two things, two responses, and all of us have a chance to respond in one of them. This is what they call it the skating rink and all skate. Like everybody can get out on this one, okay? You can do one of two things. Your response can be to say, I have never surrendered my life to this Redeemer. Even if I've been in church my whole life, but I haven't really allowed him to say, I define you. For him to say, your value is because of me. For him to give you a name and to avenge your injustices. And to give you a future and a hope. If you've not done that, that's your thing today. You just surrender. And in a moment, I'm going to show you how to do that and help you with it. And we'll help walk you through that. But if you've already done that, and there are many of us in the room that are Christians, here's what you have to do. You're going to want to take notes. This is complicated. Get ready to write this down, okay? Live like it's true. Could we just do that? Just live like this thing that we know intellectually and that we believed once. Just live like it's true. Can you imagine how much freedom there would be if you and I lived as if all of our value and worth does not come from what we do or what our kids are like or what our job or how much money or how good we look anymore? If we could really lay all that down, can you imagine how free you would be? That's a clue to the way that God wanted us to live. So go through your life and begin to ask those, like, where is it that I'm really deriving my worth? What do I believe if I lost it, I'd be lost? And then you just go to God and you say, God, I surrender this to you. Would you redeem it? It's a good thing that I made an ultimate thing. Just redeem it. Every single one of us gets to respond in that way today. Because the life of the Christian so much is really about what's happening inside us. That's the thing. I'm not going to give you a physical action to take. I'm going to give you a spiritual, emotional, inside action to take. Because Richard Foster says that the life of the Christian is actually this constant reforming, a relearning of what it means to be a human and our character to look more and more like God. Or put a more modern way, in the recent book turned short animated film that won, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. Why is it that we think so much about the outsides? It's all we can see, but everything that really matters happens on the inside. This is where we got to go. To allow the Redeemer to begin one by one to just give life and set us free of the stuff that keeps us enslaved. And you can do it starting today. So, I want to pray for us And I'm going to pray, and I'm going to ask you to join me in that and pray in two different ways. The first would be for those of you who need to choose this today to surrender. And I'm going to ask that you do that. I'll give you an easy way, but it's not about the words, it's about your heart. And in a few minutes, we're going to finish this service after I'm done and another song. We're going to go outside, and there's a young man named Austin that's a student here that recently surrendered his life to Christ this way, and we're going to go baptize him. And then, Paul, I'm going to ask you to come out and see a picture of that. But the other thing is for those of us that are followers of Christ, I'm going to ask you to pray with me that God would speak and tell you right now in this place, in your pew today, where is it that you might still be enslaved? And let him tell you he wants to set you free.